In December of 2024, we traveled to Izapa in search of a controversial relic that some believe provides evidence of Christ in the Americas and validation of the Book of Mormon. Called Izapa Stela No. 5 or the Tree of Life Stela, it is a unique monolithic stone carving depicting a scene that some identify with the prophecy of the coming of Christ, a passage from the Book of Mormon known as Lehi's vision. Since its discovery in 1941, controversy has surrounded this mysterious stone monument and its interpretation, being unlike any other monuments so far discovered in ancient Mexico or Mesoamerica, even fueling speculation about the possibility of Transoceanic contacts with the Old World through Hebrew or Phoenician navigators. Following the discovery of the Tree of Life Stela, dozens more carved stone monuments, including stelas, altars, and columns, have been unearthed by several archaeological expeditions working at Izapa, carved in a unique artistic style that is neither Maya nor Olmec, but that has been aptly called the Izapa style. Evidence shows that Izapa may be one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites in Mesoamerica, since as early as 1500 BC, home to a culture that flourished at the same time as the great Gulf Coast Olmec sites of San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes, and that may be associated with the earliest development of the Mesoamerican calendar, due to its unique geographical location.
Hello everyone, this is Marco Vigato from the Arts Project. We've just arrived at the archaeological site of Izapa in Chiapas, Mexico. This is one of the largest and most important pre-classic archaeological sites in all of Mesoamerica, dating back to 1500 BC. And we are here right at the entrance of the site. You can see some of the architectural mounds and constructions right by the sign. This site is mostly famous for its carved stelas, so we'll be seeing a lot of these carved stone monuments all around the site.
Izapa is an important pre-classic archaeological site in southern Mexico, whose origins date back to the pre-classic period of Mesoamerican civilization. It consists of several different groups of structures, named A through H, with only groups A, B, and F presently open to the public. This site appears to have been carefully oriented and aligned to mark the zenithal passage of the sun and the 260 days sacred Mesoamerican calendar.
Vincent Malmström did a very comprehensive study of Izapa and its astronomical alignments, suggesting that it was here at this specific location that the Mesoamerican calendar was invented. This is a pretty unique site because of its geographical location. It's only within a very narrow band of latitude that the number of days between two successive zenithal passages of the sun on August 13 and April 30 is exactly 260 days, as in the Mesoamerican sacred calendar.
Only at the latitude of Izapa, 15 degrees north of the equator, does August 13, the date chosen by the ancient Maya for the beginning of their sacred calendar, mark the southward transit of the vertical sun. And only at that precise latitude there are exactly 260 days between two successive zenithal passages, when the sun is at its highest in the sky on August 13 and April 30. From the point of view of Izapa, the sun rises on the summer solstice directly over the peak of the Tajomulco volcano, the highest mountain in Central America. This would have allowed to connect and sync the 260 days sacred calendar with the 365 days solar calendar. This makes Izapa one of the most likely places where the Mesoamerican calendar was first used and calibrated, perhaps as early as 1320 BC, as suggested by geographer Vincent Malmström. Many of the Izapa stelas and sculptures appear to refer to celestial events, as does also the orientation of some of its mounds and monuments. The earliest carved stone monuments at Izapa are found in Group B and reflect a clear Olmec influence. This group consists of a large plaza dominated by a massive pyramid mound which was excavated, as much of the rest of the site, by the New World Archaeological Foundation, starting in the 1960s.
We have now reached the summit of Izapa's highest mound. We're around 15 meters high. That's the largest structure at the site here in Group A. And from here you would have had a wonderful view of Volcan Tacaná, which is unfortunately covered in mist and clouds in this direction.
Perhaps the most unusual characteristic of this group are a set of stone spheres mounted on pillars, which may have been used as solar markers for astronomical observations.
We're now inside Group B of the ancient site. There are many more of these carved stelas. Probably the most unusual ones are these very large stone columns with a sphere on top. This is a kind of monument quite unique in Mesoamerica. I don't remember ever having seen anything quite like these at any other sites in Mexico or Mesoamerica. So something also quite unique of Izapa. So here we are inside Group B of Izapa. There is a huge concentration of monuments here. Some very interesting ones. There is this sort of column with a sphere on top, which is most unusual, and several large altars as well with stelas. This is again something typical of the Izapa style. Look at that. This is a huge granite stela. It's a massive altar in front. This is a Stela 9. Unfortunately, it's very much eroded, so it's hard to make out any carvings on the surface of the stela. It's a huge granite monolith, probably 2 meters tall. It may weigh between 3, maybe even up to 5 tons. So this is Stela number 10 here in Group B. This seems to be yet another representation of the Tree of Life, although probably a little bit more stylized and badly eroded compared to Stela 5 and some of the other monuments. There are more of these very strange columns with stones on top. This is something quite unusual. Don't remember ever having seen anything like this at any other Mesoamerican sites. So this just gives a sense of the scale of these massive stone column here with a sphere on top. It's for at least 2 meters tall. Here is another one of these strange columns with a sphere on top.
Some speculate that these columns may have served as solar markers to mark the zenithal passage of the sun, whereas their position on the ground reflects that of the 3 stars of Orion's belt.
Here we are approaching the base of this large mound inside Group B, and that's where we can find Stela 11. This is also one of the most famous stelas at Izapa. And you can see here something that looks like a 2-headed serpent with another sort of reptilian-like figure. Also, it is still, like many others at the site, is very eroded. We're now walking along this jungle path towards what looks like another very large monument, which is now almost completely overgrown. Wow, this is one really massive stone sculpture here. From a distance it almost looked like an Olmec stone head, but in fact it's probably more like one of the great Olmec thrones or altars. You can see it's a huge monolith here under this cover. We'll try to get a bit closer. Yeah, this is a totally Olmec. You can see the figure here. It's very similar to the thrones or altars of La Venta, but it was probably recarved at some other point in time. You can see the size of the sculpture. It's probably over 2 meters, almost 2.5 meters tall. There is a deposit with some interesting archaeological materials from the ruins.
Having visited Group B, we now head towards Group A of the ancient site.
So we've just reached Group A, which is the most important group of structures here at Izapa, but unfortunately they were just telling us that the custodian is not here, will not be here until tomorrow. As you can see here, there is a sign on the door. A lady just came immediately as she saw us to lock the gate, and the sign says that the custodian is on holiday and will not be back until December 13. This is almost 2 weeks from now. But hopefully we'll find somebody tomorrow who can open the gate for us so that we can see Stela number 5, which is the main reason why we came here to Izapa.
Group A contains the largest number of stelas, dating to a somewhat later period than Group B, starting around 300 BC. Like most of the site, Group A stands on private property, so that access is subject entirely to the whims and availability of its absentee custodian. It is inside Group A that Izapa's most famous monument is found. Known as a Stela 5 or the Tree of Life Stela, it was first discovered in 1941 by Matthew Sterling, who then went on to excavate many of the Olmec sites on the Gulf Coast of Tabasco and southern Veracruz. Less than a decade after the Stela's discovery, the Mormon scholar and BYU archaeology professor M. Wells Jakeman was the first to propose an interpretation of Stela 5 based on Lehi's vision of the Tree of Life, as described in the Book of Mormon. Since then, scholars and laymen alike have either accepted or scoffed at this theory, with newer interpretations increasingly reading the Stela as a representation of some fantastic visual creation myth.
We finally made it inside Group A of the archaeological site after having had to come back for a second time. But obviously we wanted to see the most famous stela of the Tree of Life, which is obviously the main reason why we are here. This site of Izapa was excavated by the New World Foundation during the 1950s, and a Mormon archaeologist from Brigham Young University by the name of Wells Jakeman did the most comprehensive study of Stela 5, assuming that it represents and connects with Mormon legend contained in the Book of Mormon. And here we have it. Wow, this is Stela 5 from Izapa.
The stela contains a huge number of figures and symbols, more than on any other Mesoamerican monument, clustered around a central tree seemingly connecting the subterranean, terrestrial, and celestial planes. In Jakeman's interpretation, the stela is connected with Lehi's dream, in which the prophet Lehi, said to have lived in Jerusalem around 600 BC, claimed to have been led by a man in a white robe to a tree filled with fruits. In the prophetic vision, only some of Lehi's family partook of the fruit of the tree, symbolizing the word of God and the coming of Jesus, while the rest scorned and ridiculed them. Jakeman interpreted many of the figures on Stela 5 in light of this story, even identifying on it several Book of Mormon characters, including Lehi, his wife Sariah, and their son Nephi. Unfortunately, Jakeman's interpretations were largely based on imprecise drawings of the stela, which is nowadays too weathered and damaged to provide a definitive interpretation of its symbols and figures. Since the 1950s, the LDS Church has distanced itself from Jakeman's interpretations, while leaving nevertheless open the possibility that the stela may in fact describe an episode from the Book of Mormon. Most modern scholarship tends instead to identify the subject of the stela with a visual creation myth, employing purely Mesoamerican symbolism.
Here is a very beautiful drawing of Stela 5, which is probably the most famous, the most important monument at Izapa, with this depiction of the Tree of Life. Here it's called El Portal Occidental, or the Western Portal. You can see here just a breakdown of the different symbols and glyphs that appear on these very interesting monument, at least according to the canonical mainstream representation. You can see here these very curious waves, probably under the sea, and here is an interpretation of all the different figures that appear on the stela, most of which are quite unusually bearded, which has made several researchers assume these are probably depictions of foreigners or people from outside Mesoamerica, as compared to these other more typical, more traditional Mesoamerican depictions and representations.
Even so, the exact meaning of many of the symbols and figures remains obscure. How to interpret, for instance, the pointed pyramids that appear to rise from the waters at the bottom of the stela, so eerily reminiscent of the mysterious symbol that appears between the chevrons above the entrance to the Great Pyramid of Giza, or the strange skeletal bearded figure with a pointed hat sitting to the left of the Tree of Life. Proponents of the idea of transoceanic contact have also pointed to the similarity between the stela and Mesopotamian and Near Eastern representations of the Tree of Life. Stela 5 is by no means the only controversial monument at Izapa to have given rise to a broad range of possible interpretations. The complex art of Izapa is exceptional in Mesoamerica for its unique narrative style, being not as much concerned with the celebration of royal power and priestly rituals as with the representation of mythological scenes, among which may be found some of the earliest representations of the events and episodes described in the Popol Vuh, a traditional creation story from the Guatemalan highlands, which has only come down to us through later manuscripts compiled by Spanish priests in the colonial period. Group A alone contains over 24 carved stelas and other stone monuments.
This is Stela 2. It's also one of the most interesting monuments at Izapa, as it depicts a sort of winged figure descending, as if descending from heaven, from the sky. This is Stela 4. It's more an Olmecoid or Olmec style monument. It's a very peculiar glyphs here on top. You can see here a standing figure. Here we have another Olmec style monument. This is Stela 6 that portrays a sort of snake form. It's interpreted as a transformation ritual. So you see here a figure sort of metamorphing itself into a serpent. It's not very clear, but obviously Olmec in style. So this is Stela 7, which is also standing in front of its own altar. Unfortunately, it's very abraded. Another monument here, also Olmecoid in style, very similar actually to the carvings of Chalcatzingo. Unfortunately, it's only a fragment of what would have been certainly a larger stela. This is Stela 26, and it's a rather similar representation. There are some common elements with Stela number 5 with the Tree of Life, including some triangular patterns here at the bottom. Unfortunately, this stela, the surface is very abraded, very eroded, so it's hard to make out many more details of this monument. This is another very interesting monument, Stela 27, which is a representation of this peculiar motive, this cross essentially, which is taken to represent an entrance usually associated with the underworld. Fortunately, compared to the drawing, the stela is almost unreadable in this light. You can still make out some details, particularly here on the top of the stela, even though it's clearly very hard to make out the overall composition without the aid of the drawing. Here is a small stela, fortunately also completely abraded, completely defaced, in front of what looks like was the largest mound in Group A. This is another fascinating monument. Here you have an altar that looks like a lizard or maybe even a toad or a frog. And then you have these very beautiful carved stela. Here you can make out looks like a standing figure with another seated
figure here to the left. Also the style of the carving appears to be typically Olmec or Olmecoid. Here is another one of the low mounds in Group A. You can see a sort of monumental stairway, which is again in typical Izapa architectural style, built mostly of small stones. Rather simple architecture that contrasts obviously with the very refined and sophisticated sculpture at the site. We also see here these very interesting Olmecoid sculptures. These were found also here in Group A, very near the stela with the representation of the Tree of Life. They're also very eroded sculptures, but the style is again reminiscent of Gulf Coast Olmec monuments, so probably dating from the first millennium BCE. We now leave Group A to continue our exploration of the next group of structures. Group F, located to the north of the site, belongs to the latest period of occupation of Izapa, between 100 BC and 1200 CE. It contains a ball court and several low pyramids and mounds, showing a reuse of earlier stone monuments and sculptures, among which are the remnants of stone aqueducts and other waterworks, as well as carved altars and stelas.
So here we are with our friends Ernesto and Valeria, our brave explorers. You can see in this area right by the entrance, this is right in the parking lot of the site, you already have several of these huge altar stones. See, it's very typical. You have a stela there with an altar placed in front, and some of these were clearly carved, like this one seems to be an zoomorphic representation. It looks like a serpent head. You can make out the eyes right there, and what is interesting is this like cross shape in the eyes. It is a typical Olmec motif. We find it a lot in Olmec sculpture, and this is clearly a snake or a serpent head that was originally placed in front of a now broken stela. So here we find right by the entrance of Group F this really fascinating monument. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, but you can see it's a round stone, and right in the center you have these sort of inverted T-shapes. They're all surrounding a central hall that may have been used for offerings. And it really draws my attention, this inverted T-shape, which is so similar to what we find at San Miguel Ixtapan. But this is clearly a Preclassic site. In fact, the origins of this site of Izapa may go back to at least 1500 BC. I don't know now the exact chronology of this stone, but to find this at a site that has such clear Olmec and Preclassic period influences, it's certainly very, very remarkable. So we're now heading towards the main plaza of Group F at Izapa. So this is Stela 22, contains a very interesting representation of looks like a sort of reptilian figure. Looks like, according to the description, it's sailing on this aquatic plane. You can actually make out some small fish figures right there at the base of the stela that suggests this watery association. And you have then this reptilian figure. You can see here the arms, the head, these like huge mouth and fangs. In comparison, the architecture of the site is quite simple. You have a large number of ceremonial mounds, like this one. They're probably only between 4 and 6 meters tall, with a stairway
which is one of the surprising aspects of this site. For a site that contains over 80 sculpted stelas, it is a site that has a very simple monumental architecture. You don't have any large pyramids as you have at other big Mesoamerican sites. But what it doesn't have in terms of monumental architecture, it more than compensates with the quality of its carvings and carved bas-reliefs. There are plenty of monuments and sculptures. You can see this one, which was placed right in front one of the main pyramids here at the entrance of Group F. That also has an offering table with a circular depression right there with a sort of stela or sculpture, which is now mostly broken. Just incredible that everywhere there are these low grass-covered mounds, and here there are more sculpture monuments and stelas, like this one that we see right in front of us in this direction. They're almost always placed in front of pyramids as altars. So we're here standing on top of what was one of the main mounds inside Group F. You can see a set of different structures. It's mostly low grass-covered mounds and what appear to be potentially some ball courts as well, which may well be some of the earliest in Mesoamerica. Here also in the central plaza of Group F, we find a very interesting set of sculptures here. You can see there is this that appears to be a part of maybe an aqueduct or a water channel. Then you have this monolithic basin or tub, this very interesting object in the shape of a serpent. Here again we can see more of Group F of the ancient site. This was probably the central plaza of this group of structures. Okay, so let's see what we have here under this roof. This looks like, wow, it's a huge monolith, and look at that. It looks like almost an Olmec head in the front of this altar. This is a massive altar stone. It's probably 1.5 by almost 2 meters long. And if you look at the style of this head in front, it's very similar, very reminiscent of Olmec thrones and Olmec stone monuments. So here we're standing in the middle of another structure that looks like it could have been a ball court. You see these two parallel embankments or mounds on the two opposite sides. This will be one of the earliest ball courts in all of Mesoamerica. And here there seems to be carved stela or stone monument right by the side of the ball court. So this is probably one of the earliest representations of Quetzalcoatl here in Group F of Izapa, It's generally interpreted as the arrival of a person or a whole population on a boat. You can see here the shape of the boat, and this person here that is sitting on the boat is holding staffs which are interpreted as symbols of kingship and of power. And this figure may actually represent the god Quetzalcoatl and his arrival by sea. You can see here all these waveforms right under the boat that suggest a journey by sea. There are more figures here also on the right hand side. Unfortunately, this stela, this carving, is now badly damaged, badly eroded, but one can still make out most details. So this is stela 60, which is unfortunately almost completely defaced. It's supposed to represent a ball player, somebody playing the Mesoamerican ball game, but it's very, very defaced. Its location though, it's interesting because it stands right at one end of this very interesting ball court here at the site. It contains also a number of other carved stone monuments. So here is another interesting monument on this side of Group F. This looks like a standing stela. It's quite unusual. We can see some carvings here on the side. It's probably a couple of meters tall, carved out of a single block of granite. Leaving the ball court here to our right, we're heading towards this small but apparently very well preserved pyramid that has a beautiful stone stairway going up. It's one of the largest structures here in this part of the site inside Group F. It seems that during the earliest periods of its history, in the mid-2nd and early 1st millennium BC, Izapa shared many characteristics with contemporaneous Gulf Coast Olmec sites. The Olmec influence seemingly peaked around 700 BC, with the erection of large stone monuments and the construction of impressive pyramids and astronomically aligned monuments. Then, around 600 to 550 BC, a remarkable transformation occurred. A new people came to Izapa, rearranging some monuments and recarving others, creating a new artistic style which they used to express a new set of myths and beliefs, which would later become the foundation of much of later Maya mythology, as expressed in their sacred book, the Popol Vuh. One of the most central themes of Izapa art is that of resurrection, which also features prominently in the Popol Vuh, in the story of the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who are resurrected and transformed into fish. The two hero twins are shown on Stela 1, originally in Group A, in the form of two fish swimming in a river, or in a decapitation scene on Stela 21, where they are shown carrying the spirit of the deceased. Stela 50 also contains a striking depiction of resurrection, with an umbilical cord emanating from a skeleton tethered to new life ascending to heaven. Two fish also appear on Stela 5 and may be similarly associated with the idea of resurrection, symbolized perhaps by the fruits of the tree of life that a benevolent deity appears to be offering them as they ascend towards the sky band. The new group who brought this belief system to Izapa between 600 and 550 BC were neither Maya nor Olmecs. They inherited much of their culture from the Olmecs, and exerted a profound influence on the beginning of Maya art and civilization, without being themselves Maya. So, who were these people? Putting the possible Book of Mormon connections aside, the dragon and bird-like motifs found in Izapan art may suggest a connection with the Chavin art style of South America, representing thus a possible focus of Andean artistic influence in Mesoamerica. Supporting the possibility of transoceanic contact at Izapa is Stela 67, found in the ball court of Group F and depicting a seemingly birded individual on a boat, which may connect to similar Maya accounts of the arrival of their ancestors from the sea. Only a very small portion of the enormous archaeological site of Izapa has been excavated, with new monuments and sculptures constantly being unearthed, like this remarkable altar with inverted T-shapes around the central hall found in 2020 in Group H and presently displayed near the entrance to the parking lot of Group F. Much of the site remains unprotected on private property and exposed to the risk of looting and urban encroachment from the nearby city of Tapachula. As recently as 2021, a large mound was destroyed in Group C to make room for a new residential development. New findings are also helping to push back in time the origins of this mysterious site, with a recent geophysical survey revealing evidence of an earlier construction phase inside one of the site's largest pyramidal mounds. We can only hope that research at Izapa will continue to reveal more about the origins of its mysterious builders and their connections with the Olmecs and the Maya.